Hey folks, welcome back to DIY guitar making. We are here actually in the middle of a workshop with two students. We got Rick and Michelle. Say hello. And they're gonna man the camera for me, and we are going to route some binding channels on this guitar. So I'm not sure how much of this we'll do, but there will definitely be some interesting things that we'll at least talk about. So here, if you guys wanna grab this. And so I was just beginning to talk about how we get the depth of channel and the height set on our binding tower jig. And so first of all, let me get a set of bearings just to show you guys something. Okay, so the first cut we're making is the binding ledge, and then we'll be making a second cut over here for the purfling ledge. Of course, you can do all this simply on one router by swapping everything out. But you know me, I don't like to have to swap out bits and things like that if I don't have to. If I can have like a little dedicated setup for certain things, that just makes things go a lot quicker. And so the way the channels work is you're gonna have a whole slew of bearings of various sizes, and there's a relationship between the size of the bit and the size of the bearing that's going to dictate how deep your channel goes. So the smaller the bearing means the more that bit is going to stick out, and hence the deeper the channel you're going to have. So again, an inverse relationship. You have smaller bearing, deeper channel. The bigger your bearing is, the closer that bearing size is going to be to your overall size of your cutter, and so you're going to have a smaller channel, right? Up into the point where your bearing matches the cutter and you have no channel, perfectly flush. Okay, so that's how we get our depth, and then the height is really easy. There's a shoe down here that we just turn to get that height just so. Me and Michelle and Rick, we already talked about this off camera, so I'm not going to belabor it too much, but you know, we've got the guitar set up in the carrier so that we're not tipping on that radius. And the next thing we're going to do right now, actually Michelle is going to do, is set the individual heights of this so that this is actually level to the table. And the way we do that, hold on one second, is with our specialized StuMac binding height ruler. Don't sue me, StuMac. This is all in jest. This is not a real tool. So anyway, you take a piece of scrap wood, make a single mark on it, that's your ruler. You don't need a real ruler. In fact, I don't even want to use a real ruler because it's too confusing with all the marks on it. You just need one mark, and you're going to set each post to that exact mark, okay? Doesn't matter where the mark is, it just matters that these posts are all at the same height, and this achieves that. So if you want to get started with that. Okay, so at this point, once you have each post set up, you will most often find that if you rock it, there's a tip somewhere. It's always going to be on one axis and not the other, right? So it's sitting on these 2 points perfectly, but not these two. And that is just a persistent problem with anything that has 4 points of contact. It's very hard to get 4 points of contact to actually contact all at the same time. That's why, you know, chairs and tables, always shim them because they get that little rock. But if you think of like a 3, you know, those little nightstands that only have 3 legs or something like that, those do fine, right? It's very easy to get those not to rock. So anyway, very simple way of dealing with the 4th point. All you have to do, instead of chasing it, which is what most people do, where you adjust this one, then go back, and you end up just moving that tip somewhere else. All you have to do is try the guitar out in both orientations. Here's what I mean by orientations. If you put a weight here, or just your finger as a weight, and then check the whole guitar in that orientation, you know, maintaining the weight right there, so I'm always pressing down. What I'm checking to see is there's going to be one correct orientation and one not correct orientation. And this is the not correct orientation because I just checked this and the whole thing looked great. So I can already tell you, yep, this is now low, right? So all we have to do now, let's put it in the correct orientation, right there, and just raise this up until it contacts. Not raise it up and push up against it, but just to close the gap that you visually see there. Like this. So raise that up. And tip is gone, and the tip is, it hasn't moved somewhere else. So now we're perfectly level and there's no rocking there. Okay, so now we can go ahead. We already talked about the bearings, which gives us our depth. And we talked about how to get the height. You can just adjust the shoe or even adjust the this little dial here on the side of the router. And what we're going to do now, because this is already set up, it's already good to go, but it's not a bad idea to make a little test cut, and we can do that right here underneath where the fretboard is. All right, so all we have to do to make our first little cut, and again, it's just a little test cut up here, is place the guitar on the shoe. The shoe is large, right? So you don't have to be and shouldn't be right up against the cutter on the shoe. We just need to be on the edge of the shoe. That way we can turn this on very easily and comfortably, knowing that the guitar is not right up against the cutter and it's not gonna, you know, throw the guitar or anything like that. And then once we have that on, you'll see me just slide this in and make a tiny cut, and then I'll pull it away while it's still running. And that affords me the opportunity, you know, since I've pulled the guitar away, I can reach my hand up and turn it off safely, right? Rather than turning it off while it's still engaged with the wood, right? You'll see what I mean. Here we go. Okay, so I'm on the shoe. All right. Take a look at that right there. It's a nice clean channel. Let me see if I have a scrap just to show you. Might just have to cut this a little bit smaller. And I can just nip it like this. Okay, so we got a small piece. We are doing side purfling here, because this, by the way, is the Florentine cutaway and advanced binding / purfling methods course. It's kind of like a 102 course if the regular course is a 101. So we're doing all the fancy miters and stuff like that. So what I'm mostly interested in here with checking is not how far up this extends over the top. I want it to be proud of the top surface, and it most definitely is. But what's most important is on this face, I want this to be as close to perfectly flush as I can get it. Sort of conventional wisdom is to leave your binding just a hair proud, but I like to aim for perfectly flush, and that's because these elements are so thin to begin with that I find there's just enough natural variation, even when you do everything right, that if you aim for slightly proud, you will actually end up in certain areas a little bit too thin, because in those areas it'll stick out more and you'll have to sand it away more, and when it's all said and done, you'll have sort of this wimpy, thin binding, and you'll be able to tell. But if you aim for flush, in some areas you'll be slightly proud, and in other areas you'll be slightly shy, right? Just because of natural variation, and that won't be noticeable. So right now, I mean, this is, if you guys want to feel that, that feels great. It's like perfectly flush. Here, I'll move my hand.
Yeah, that's good.
That's what we're after. Okay, so directionally, there's a couple different ways to approach this actually, but what a lot of people do, and what, you know, sometimes I do, is what we did before with the trim, when we took the trim off, which is to first do our cuts in that conventional cut direction, so that you're always going downhill to the grain, right? And then skipping the areas like this, where you'd actually be climbing, you'd be climb cutting, I'm sorry, you wouldn't be climb cutting, you'd be going uphill and into the grain. And then actually what we would want to do is return to those areas and climb cut through those areas. I will say though, some people just literally climb cut the whole thing. And sometimes when I do Florentine cutaways, I end up just climb cutting the whole thing, because the grain direction is even more scattered and all over the place. And so it just all depends on what you're most comfortable with and what you understand, right? Because you want to understand what you're doing and be thinking about the grain direction. But just know that you can always do the whole thing on any guitar as a climb cut, and you shouldn't really, as long as everything, you know, the bit's sharp and all of that, if everything's taken care of, you shouldn't really have any problems doing the whole thing as a climb cut. Which begs the question, why not just do it that way anyway? Why knock out these safe areas with the conventional cut first? And it's simply that climb cutting is slightly more dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Certainly it is, and it's just more uncomfortable, because the way you have to handle the guitar when you're climb cutting. Again, earlier we talked about dynamic resistance. The way you have to hold that guitar, if you're kind of squeezing it together as you're going, it's just a little more tiring, honestly, to do the whole guitar like that, because you're always gripping the guitar in a little bit more of not quite an intense way, but just with a little more energy. So some people like to knock out those conventional cuts first. Hopefully that makes some sense there. I don't want to confuse by going a little too deep into that, but in this case what we're going to do is we'll knock out some of these conventional cut areas so you can see what that looks like, and then in the end I'll do a full pass around the whole thing, getting all the areas that we missed, and then we'll get you guys on it when we move to other parts of the guitar in the back. So I'll just demo this one here. Okay, need ears. You guys got your ears on, just so you guys can see what the plan is. Might as well draw it out. So here, the safe conventional cut right there, because again the rotation of the bit is this way. You can't see because the help makes it hard to see pencil on here. That's the way the bit's rotating, so that's a safe way to go from here to here. As you come up here, you'll be biting into that grain, so we skip there and come down here to a nice safe area again. And that one, and that's really it. There's a little spot here. I mean, technically you could hit that, but you could also just climb cut that part. Okay, it's all about just understanding grain direction, being mindful, and maybe a little bit of prior planning before you turn on the router. So again, I put it on the shoe, but not in contact with the bit. It's a pretty big shoe, so keep it a little bit of a distance away. Turn it on, push it in. Pull it away at the end, so that I'm still on that shoe, but I'm away from the bit, so I can safely reach up and turn that off. Inside here, I just always do a climb cut for the whole thing. On the back, when you flip this over, the grain orientation is different, right, in how you'd deal with it. So I always just find that it's simplest just to think of this as a climb cut no matter what. It's a small area, so it's easy to just climb cut that. I wouldn't try to do any little small conventional cuts because it's just not worth it. Okay, so now I'm going to climb cut the rest of this. it. Look, let me talk a little bit about what you saw there, because you might have noticed a couple things. One, you may have noticed when I'm climb cutting like that, there's a certain cadence to my movements where I'll progress forward, and then you'll see me kind of back down the channel a little bit, and then re-engage again. And it doesn't have anything to do with, like, you know, cooling down the bit or something like that, or going slow. It actually has everything to do with being able to reposition my hands. So as you're turning, of course, if you're just death gripping this, at some point, you know, your hands, you won't be able to turn anymore. So all you have to do is you over time you get sort of a feel for this. It becomes second nature. But there's this cadence where you go as far as you can, and then you just back down the channel. And when you back down the channel, you're safe to kind of scoot your hands over so you can then re-engage. And then when you want to scoot your hands again, you just back off slightly and then re-engage. Now, an important difference I find is when I say back off, I don't mean pull the bearing away from the guitar so that you're no longer against the bearing and you're just, you know, on the edge of the shoe. What I mean is you just go, the bearing's still engaged on the side, but you back down your channel, okay?
Just move backwards.
Yeah, exactly. Just move backwards, right? Don't pull the guitar away. Perfect. And so yeah, that's just something you'll get used to. But hey, when you're doing this the first time, say, you know, at home in your own shop, I mean, you're gonna, you know, feel a little bit of it here, but when you're in your own environment, again, one thing, if you're not quite comfortable with it yet, that you can do, or even always you could do it this way if you wanted to, just take more time, is you can literally just decide, okay, I'm gonna go start here, and I'm gonna end here, and then I'm gonna shut it off, right? And then I'm gonna reset myself and do another like 6 to 8 inch stretch, and just, you could do the whole guitar that way. But you know, I suspect that after you get to your 7th guitar or so, anyone who, you know, gets that far doing channels like this won't be doing that anymore. So that's just a little tip. It's something to think about, that as you get better, you'll kind of get used to that cadence and you can just kind of knock the whole thing out in one pass. And the other thing I want to mention is at the very end of that, you saw me just do a cleanup pass there, and that's always important, because when you're doing that climb cut, even in a very micro sense, the bit occasionally runs just slightly, meaning it pushes the workpiece just slightly, and anytime it does that, it always leaves a tiny bit of wood behind. And so by then going back over the whole thing, and it doesn't matter that you're going in the conventional direction that time, because it's the wood that you'd be removing is so small that it's going to be a nice clean removal anyway. So it's a good idea anyway to just, for that reason, do a cleanup pass. All right, and so there we have it. We have one channel. We're going to do the purfling now on this, but I think that's pretty good for a video. So I will say goodbye to you guys, and you guys can say goodbye as well.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.